My name is Claire Novak. I am 29 years old, and I run a small but growing interior design studio in Austin, Texas. We work with commercial clients, restaurants, boutique hotels, office spaces, and last year we landed our biggest contract yet, a regional hotel chain, 12 properties across 4 states. 3 years ago, my older brother walked out of my life. He called me selfish, delusional, and told my parents I had stolen from him. They believed him. Just like that, I became a ghost to my own family. Last Thursday, he walked into my studio with a lawyer and a folder of papers. He sat down across from me like nothing had ever happened. Then he told me he wanted 40% of everything I had built. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. And that smile is what I want to tell you about. But first, please like this video and subscribe to Heartway Stories. It means more than you know. It was a Wednesday afternoon. My assistant Brooke knocked on my glass office door and opened it halfway. That specific way she does when something is off. "Claire," she said carefully, "there's a man in the lobby. He says he's your brother." I was holding a color swatch between 2 fingers. I set it down slowly. "He have anyone with him?" "A woman. She's carrying a briefcase." I didn't say anything for a second. 3 years. No calls. No texts. Not even a message on my birthday. And now he was standing in my lobby like it was a Tuesday errand. "Put them in the back conference room," I said. "Not the front one, the back." Brooke nodded and left without asking why. She's good like that. I stood up from my desk, smoothed my blazer, and walked to the small mirror on the wall by the door. I looked at myself for a second. Not to check my hair. Just to remember who I was before I walked into that room. Because the version of me who used to sit across from my brother and shrink, that person doesn't work here anymore. When I pushed open the door, my brother was standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, looking at the framed project photos on the wall. The lawyer, a woman in her 40s with reading glasses on a chain, was already seated, a folder open in front of her. "Nice work," my brother said, nodding at the photos. He didn't turn around right away. Classic move. Make the other person wait. "Ryan," I said. He turned and smiled. That same easy smile, like we'd spoken last week. "Claire, you look good. Why are you here?" He tilted his head slightly like the directness surprised him, even though it shouldn't have. "Can a brother check in? You haven't checked in for 3 years. He sighed, that performative sigh that means he's about to reframe something. "We've all had time to cool down, think things through." He gestured toward the chair across from the lawyer. "Sit down. Let's talk like adults." I didn't sit. "What's in the folder?" The lawyer looked up at me. "Ms. Novak, I'm Sandra Hale. I represent your brother in a potential business arrangement." She slid the folder across the table. "We'd like to propose a partnership." I didn't touch it. "What kind of partnership?" Ryan sat down then, leaning back like he was settling in for something comfortable. "You're growing fast," he said. "The hotel contract, the new hires, I've been following along. Proud of you, honestly." "Ryan, I want in," he said simply. "My company needs the credibility your studio gives, a formal partnership, your design reputation tied to my construction firm, and we present as a full-service development package to larger clients." "And what percentage are you proposing?" He glanced at the lawyer. She said it calmly. 40% equity transfer. 40% of a company I had built from a 1-bedroom apartment with a laptop and a credit card and 3 years of 12-hour days. I picked up the folder. Flipped through the first few pages without reading them. Then I set it down. "Who told you about the hotel contract?" I asked. Ryan shrugged. "Word gets around in Austin." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'll need some time to review this." The lawyer nodded. "Of course. We'd like an answer by end of week." Ryan stood and buttoned his jacket. "I know this is a lot to take in, but think about what it could mean for both of us." He paused. "Families should be working together, not apart." I walked them to the door without saying anything else. When it clicked shut behind them, I stood in the hallway alone for a moment. Then I took up my phone and called my attorney. To understand what happened in that conference room, you need to understand what happened 3 years ago. because the folder my brother brought wasn't really about a partnership, and his smile wasn't really about reconciliation. It started with a project called Finch & Low. Finch & Low was a boutique hospitality group looking to renovate 6 properties across Texas and Colorado. It was a dream client, the kind of contract that could change the trajectory of a small studio. I had been working on the pitch for 4 months. The concept decks, the material sourcing, the phasing plan, the budget breakdowns, everything. Ryan had a construction firm at the time. Mid-size, mostly residential, but he wanted to move into commercial. He came to me and said we should pitch Finch & Low together. Full service, design and build under one roof. He said he'd handle the contractor relationships and site logistics. I would handle everything creative and client-facing. I trusted him. He was my brother. I walked him through every detail of the pitch. We got the meeting. It went well, really well. The lead partner at Finch & Low, a man named Gerald, shook both our hands afterward and said he'd be in touch. 2 weeks later, I got an email from Gerald's office. They had decided to go in a different direction. I was confused. Disappointed, but I moved on. These things happen. 6 weeks after that, I was having coffee with a colleague, and she mentioned she'd driven past a renovation site in San Antonio, one of the Finch & Low properties. And the aesthetic, she said, looked exactly like the concept I had shown her months earlier. The warm plaster walls, the arched doorways, the specific terracotta tile pattern I had sourced from a small maker in Portugal. I thought she was mistaken. I looked up the project online. She wasn't mistaken. Ryan's firm was the contractor on record. And the design, my design, had been submitted by a designer I had never heard of, someone who had been hired 3 weeks after our pitch meeting. I called Ryan immediately. He didn't answer. I drove to his office. His assistant said he was out. I left 3 messages. He finally called back 4 days later. "I don't know what you think you saw," he said. "Ryan, those are my drawings. That's my sourcing list." A tile alone. I spent 6 weeks finding that supplier. "You're being paranoid. I'm looking at photographs of the building. Lots of people use arched doorways, Claire." That was the moment I understood I wasn't dealing with a miscommunication. I wasn't dealing with something that could be resolved with an honest conversation. I was dealing with someone who had made a decision and was going to stay in it. I told him I was going to talk to my parents. He said, "Go ahead." So I did. I went to their house, sat at their kitchen table, laid out everything I had, the concept decks with my file creation dates, the email chain with the tile supplier, the timeline of events. My father looked at Ryan, who had also shown up, and then back at me. "You two worked on this together," he said slowly. "How are we supposed to know whose idea was whose?" My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "Claire, sweetheart, you know how you get when you feel like someone is overshadowing you." I pulled my hand back. "What does that mean?" "You've always had a hard time sharing credit," she said gently. "Even when you were little." I looked at Ryan. He was watching me with something close to pity on his face. I stood up. I picked up my documents. And I said very quietly, "Okay." That was the last time I sat at that table. The next 3 years were the loneliest and most clarifying of my life. I started from the edges. Small hospitality clients, a wine bar in East Austin, a co-working space in the design district. I built slowly and deliberately, and I documented everything. Every concept, every source, every revision, every email. Not because I was paranoid, because I had learned what it costs to be the person in the room without receipts. I hired carefully. I kept my overhead lean. And 18 months in, someone referred me to the regional hotel chain. 14 months after that, we had a signed contract for 12 properties. I had not spoken to my brother in 3 years. Or my parents. My mother had texted me twice, once on Christmas, once on my birthday. Single lines. I had read them and not responded, not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. And then Ryan walked into my studio with a lawyer and a folder. The call with my attorney, Denise, lasted about 40 minutes. I told her everything. The folder, the proposed terms, the 3 years of silence, and, most importantly, what had happened with Finch & Low. Because I had never stopped documenting. I had the original files. I had the supplier correspondence. I had a time-stamped archive of every version of that pitch deck. Denise was quiet for a moment after I finished. He came to your office, she said. Yes. With a lawyer? Yes. And he's proposing 40%. Yes. And his proposing 40%. Yes. Another pause. Claire, do you want to just make this go away, or do you want to do something with it? I thought about my father's face at the kitchen table, my mother's hand patting mine, Ryan's expression, that look of practiced, comfortable pity. I want to do something with it, I said. I called Ryan back the next morning and told him I wanted to move forward, but that I had a condition. What kind of condition? He said. I want to present the partnership to my full team and our primary investors before anything is signed. It's how I run things. Transparency. He paused for half a second. That's fine. I'll set it up for Friday evening. You can present the proposal yourself. He sounded pleased. That's exactly how it should be done. Professionally. We hung up. I immediately got to work. By Friday, the conference room at my studio held 14 people. My 2 investors, both of whom had backed me from the early days, my senior designer and project director, my business development lead, Denise, my attorney, and 2 people who had flown in from Dallas, a forensic accountant named Mr. Webb and his associate, whom I had retained quietly the day after Ryan's visit. Ryan arrived with Sandra Hale, the lawyer. He was wearing his best suit. He shook hands around the room with the ease of someone who believes every room he enters already belongs to him, had greeted him warmly, offered water, let him settle in. When everyone was seated, I opened the meeting. Thank you all for being here, I said. As some of you know, we've been approached about a significant partnership opportunity. I want to make sure this is handled with full transparency, which means everyone in this room understands exactly who we'd be working with and what we'd be agreeing to. I looked at Ryan. I've asked my brother to present the proposal directly. Ryan looked comfortable. He stood up and walked through the terms clearly. The equity structure, the business rationale, the projected client pipeline. He was good at this part. Always had been. When he finished, I thanked him. Then I said, before we move forward, I'd like to share a few things of my own. Ryan tilted his head. Of course. I nodded to Mr. Webb. He opened his laptop and connected it to the projector screen. A document appeared. Then another. Then a set of financial records. These, Mr. Harapt, Webb said calmly, are the records of Ryan Novak's construction firm over the past 4 years. Ryan's expression didn't change immediately, but his jaw tightened. 3 commercial contracts initiated, Mr. Webb continued. 2 completed and subsequently flagged by clients for design attribution disputes. 1. The Finch and Low project, involving a formal complaint filed by a supplier in Portugal. He looked up. The complaint was settled quietly. The terms are confidential, but the existence of the complaint is on record. One of my investors leaned forward. What kind of attribution dispute? I spoke then. Calmly. In 2021, my brother and I developed a design pitch together for a hospitality client. The concepts, sourcing, and creative direction were entirely mine. After the pitch, the client, who had been contacted separately by Ryan, contracted his firm using my designs, submitted under a different designer's name. I paused. I have the original files, time-stamped, archived. If anyone would like to see them, they're available. The room was quiet. Ryan said, "This is completely irrelevant to Ryan." My voice was even. "I'm not finished." He stopped. Mr. Webb advanced the slide. A new set of records appeared. Bank transfers, a business account, a series of transactions to a holding company registered in Nevada. These are transfers from the Finch and Low project account, Mr. Webb said, totaling approximately $380,000. Moved to a holding entity that does not appear in any of Mr. Novak's disclosed business filings. Sandra Hale put her pen down. Ryan stood up. "I'm not going to sit here and—" "You're welcome to leave," I said, "but Mr. Webb will still finish." He didn't leave. Mr. Webb finished. When he closed his laptop, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then one of my investors, A woman named Patricia, who had written me my first check when I had nothing but a concept and a track record, leaned back in her chair and looked at my brother. "I've seen a lot of partnership proposals," she said. "This is the first time I've seen one that came with its own audit." Ryan looked at me across the table. I held his gaze. Then he picked up his folder, said something quietly to Sandra, and they both stood. He walked toward the door. He didn't look at me again. Sandra paused at the doorway and said very professionally, "We'll be in touch." Then she left too. The door clicked shut. My senior designer exhaled slowly. Someone else reached for their water glass. The room took a collective breath. Denise looked at me from the end of the table and gave me the smallest nod. I looked down at my hands for a second. Then I said to the room, "Thank you all for staying late on a Friday. I'll have Brooke send around the recap Monday morning." I stood. There's no partnership to vote on. That night, I drove home alone. I made tea. I sat on my back porch in the dark and listened to the neighborhood. I thought about my mother's hand on mine at the kitchen table. I thought about my father saying, "How are we supposed to know whose idea was whose?" Like uncertainty was a reasonable defense for looking away. I thought about Ryan's face when Mr. Webb's slides appeared on the screen. Not panic. Not guilt. Just recalibration. That rapid, practiced look of someone adjusting their story in real time. I also thought about the fact that I felt very little anger. I had expected anger. But what I actually felt was something quieter. Something close to clarity. The work I had built was mine. The documentation existed. The people in that room had seen it. My investors hadn't flinched. They had leaned in. That mattered more than I had words for. I did not call my parents that night. I haven't called them since. I don't know if they know what happened in my conference room. I don't know if Ryan told them a version of it or his own version or nothing at all. What I do know is this. 3 years ago, I walked out of my parents' kitchen with a folder of evidence and no one willing to look at it. And I made a decision then, very quietly, to stop waiting for the people who had looked away to turn back around. I stopped performing for their approval. I stopped explaining myself. I simply built. And what I built, no one can sign away or claim or walk into uninvited, not anymore. People ask me sometimes how I held it together in that room, how I stayed calm when my brother was sitting across from me proposing to take 40% of my company after everything he had done. The honest answer is that I had been preparing for that room for 3 years. Not planning it, exactly. Just living in a way that meant when that moment came, I would already have everything I needed. Ryan thought he was walking into a negotiation. He was walking into a negotiation. He was walking into a record. And that's the thing about building quietly and honestly and with every receipt in order. It doesn't just protect your work. It protects your future self from the people who counted on you forgetting. I hadn't forgotten anything. I've thought a lot about what made that Friday evening possible, and it wasn't the auditor. It wasn't the projector or the folder or the timestamps on my files. Those were just tools. What made it possible was a decision I made 3 years earlier at my parents' kitchen table, when I picked up my documents and walked out without raising my voice. I didn't leave because I gave up. I left because I understood something in that moment that I couldn't have put into words yet, that staying in a room where the truth is inconvenient doesn't make the truth louder. It just makes you smaller. Ryan counted on me staying small. That's the honest thing I have to say about him. He didn't come to my studio because he thought I'd grown. He came because he assumed that whatever I had built it the same way I used to operate, moving fast, trusting people, keeping things in my head instead of on paper. He thought 3 years was enough time for me to have softened, to have gotten lonely enough to want the family back, on any terms. He was wrong about what 3 years does to a person when they decide to use them. What I've come to understand is that actions always carry weight forward, not in a mystical way, just in the plain, practical sense that what you do shapes what becomes available to you later. Ryan spent 3 years building on a foundation he didn't own. I spent 3 years building on one I did. By the time we sat across from each other again, those 3 years were sitting on the table between us, and only one of us had brought receipts. That's not luck. That's not fate. That's just the math of how choices accumulate. The thing about integrity, real integrity, not the performed kind, is that it's mostly invisible while you're doing it. Nobody sees you resending a supplier confirmation email to yourself just to have the timestamp. Nobody sees you opening a new folder and naming it clearly and saving it in 3 places. It feels excessive in the moment. It feels like distrust. But what it actually is respect for your future self. It's saying, I'm going to build something real, and I'm going to make sure it stays mine. Brooke knocked on my door that Wednesday afternoon, and I felt my stomach drop. I won't pretend I was calm from the start. I wasn't. But I also wasn't unprepared. And that difference between being afraid and being unprepared is the whole thing. You're allowed to feel the fear. You're not allowed to let it be the only thing you brought to the room. I think about Denise asking me on the phone, do you want to make this go away, or do you want to do something with it? That question stayed with me, because for a long time, my instinct in hard situations was to make things go away. Keep the peace. Absorb the cost. Move on. And I had confused that instinct with being the bigger person, when really it was just being the quieter one. There's a difference between choosing not to fight and choosing to be ready. I had spent 3 years learning that difference. And when it mattered, I knew which one I was doing.